Hey there, how's everyone doing today? This is the painting we'll be doing in this video. It's actually a lesson from Matthew White, whose channel I subscribe to and follow. He has some good lessons. He's actually a Wink of the Week. Go over and look at that playlist. You'll see that there's a Wink of the Week with Matthew White's website on there. So you can quickly find your way over there if you want to look at it. I will include a link for this specific lesson in the description as well. So here's what we're doing, right? It's a street light in Venice. So the big deal was to do the light, right? That was really what this whole exercise was about, was to show you ways to paint light so that it's somewhat believable and feels like you're getting the correct technique. It's a technique I've never tried before, so that's why I did this. All right, head on off and I'll start a quick little conclusion now. Conclusion. Wow, this was fun. Great lesson. Good step-by-step, right? Got to learn a lot about how to do light and letting some of the white of the paper come through and then playing with sort of water and washing this. You know, the background, not my best work, I'll be honest. Some of it, and I just realized when I was sitting here talking about this, if I wanted to make it a little more convincing, shadows off the figures would have been really smart. But anyways, I think it was successful. What I could have done better is a darker background, right? I'm still getting used to the fact of how much the paint lightens when it dries. So this was fairly dark when I started it, but as it dried, it got light. Instead of putting another wash, I decided to leave it. I feel like it's successful. But anyways, so there you go. Give me suggestions if there's other things you want to see on the channel. Give me a like if you thought this was okay, and subscribe if you feel like seeing the next video or being told when it comes out. So great, thanks a lot. See you the next time. Okay, we're going to start a new tutorial just here, and we're going to try to do some lights. So first thing I'm going to do is get a sponge. And I'm going to wet down the paper front and back. When I'm wetting down the front, I'm going to try to avoid getting the actual center of the lights wet. And that's great. Let's just make a mess everywhere. And we'll be going from light to dark on this. So I'm going to start with this yellow and burnt sienna mix on the wet paper and just going around. Bring it in around each one of these.
So don't forget to put a little gold on the lamppost next to the lights. Now to make this glow, take a brush that's wet and a paper towel, and you're really just softening the edges around these lights. So you don't want a hard edge where there's that gold glowing color. So you can see me working back and forth. And now I'm starting to mix up some color for the sky and start to do a wash around these. Not coming in contact with the glowing yellow just yet. Giving it time to dry so that we don't mix the two paints. So I lied. This is all wet on wet. I let it dry a little bit so the paints didn't bleed into each other, but now we're working with the paints right up and into the lights and actually bringing the sky darker, as you can see. So I'll be going in different waves, if you will, right? Adding a little blue in, making it a little darker purple, go from darker purple at the top of the paper and let it fade to a lighter color down towards the horizon.
What isn't being said, but I see in the picture, there's a little bit of orange and pink down near the buildings. So just going to add a touch of that in. I think that's a place to let it dry. Still not dark enough, right? So I'm going to take that same mix. I might need to get more cobalt blue out. Prime it with some water so I get a really nice strong wash, and I can start to just use right in. Yeah, that's a little too strong. Oh well, that's okay. There we go. And I'm just going to bring in a little bit. I'm going to get another paper towel down here. And just bring in some neutral tint to really get this dark. I'm going to pretty carefully paint around the lights. But the whole idea behind this is to get the lights to really have some contrast behind them. That went too much into the light. Oops. There, take that out.
So continue to darken the wash up from the top and let it fade and be lighter as we get down towards the bottom of the horizon. This is where I should have made it much darker, as I said at the beginning of this whole thing.
Clean the blue off so we have some room. Playing with a burnt sienna. Touch of some red in here. That might be more than a touch, but that's okay. I'll just add some more burnt sienna in. And a touch of the neutral tint just to darken it down. And give ourselves some warm. And I'm just running on the edge. Add some warmth in, almost like a reflection under that light. Some burnt sienna on the edges, smaller brush, just to help outline. And mine is a burnt sienna light, so I'm going to just touch in a couple of little bit of this Premonite Genuine, which kind of has a reddish tone to it, but you see how that brings it down a little darker, and just a touch of neutral. Might be a little wet. Just
So now take that color and just outline around the lights. Give them a little contrast. And then I'm using the same color to start putting in the people. But what I'm noticing is it's just too wet.
I'm gonna let some of this dry off. I'm gonna let the rest of it. I'm gonna come back and do people when it's a little drier, and then let the whole thing dry. Oh, and take care of my issues here. All right, if I mess with that more, I'm gonna make it worse. I'm gonna let that dry. So everything's dry. Now we're gonna work on the buildings in the background. So making sure I've got some good solid wells of the colors I want. Okay, so some neutral for sure. I'm going to use some burnt umber. And I want to make sure this is a strong wash, because it's going across. Just maybe a touch of ultramarine. That's too warm right now. We want to warm it up later. Okay. Oops. My bad. Okay. I don't want too wet. I don't want a strong wash. I have some lines. That's a little too wet because it's not strong enough. I'm just going across and creating and go right through the lamp post. It's okay to leave a few areas where you're leaving little blanks, potentially suggesting detail. I just didn't feel like it was strong enough, so I wanted to strengthen it up a little bit.
So using that same wash, keep working on the building and realize under the building is water. So you want to be using a lighter wash and work around the people. Although, speaking of the people, let's take some time to put in their shirts. And then we'll move on to some details on the water's edge, where the poles are that you attach your boats and your gondolas to from the water, which is the road, right? Then take some time to go back into the legs of the people. Don't worry with feet, and make it a little blurry near the bottom of their feet so that it looks like there's motion. Now we can use some of the same pigment and get into the light and start to add the contrast next to the dark. The dark next to the light. So this lets us emphasize the light being shined out from these glowing orbs. I'm just adding more detail in here.
first with some of these poles because they just faded out because I put them in when it was too wet. Everything's dry now, and also some in the back in the buildings.
So not much narration is really needed here. I'm just filling in some details, getting more contrast where I wanted it. Some of the places in the buildings in the background, I'm adding some water and actually rubbing the paint to try to get some transparency through it.
All right, so I'm going to try to tackle my light pole. The first thing I'm going to do with that is make sure I'm using a mix. I'm going to take some of this neutral, get something dark and very heavy in pigment. And I'm putting it over the dark I had before. That's also kind of part of where the light originally came from. Right, so it's warmer, right? So I want to keep it in that warm range. That might not even be enough. So pulling a little yellow ochre. It's not pigmented enough yet. So let's get a really strong piece. I need a there we go. Strengthen it up a little. I'm just going to kind of go for it. Now I can start to strengthen this up and even cool it down.
All right, so now we're going to make the pole go to the ground and then work on the base of the pole with a warmer color that's more like the paving color. But you'll see what happens when I first move that in. It's way too bright. So I toned it down a little bit and then added a little more detail into the pavers.
Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and last step I'll come back and add a couple of highlights in gouache after everything's dry. So just adding a couple of last details here instead of just having this all be pencil work. Paint over some of those lines, create shadows in here. I'm going to add some lines for the walkway. I'm going to remove the palette so I can actually work.
Be mindful of the perspective as you put these lines in so that they follow the path and get narrower.
Just trying to add a little more interest in the foreground. Right, it's probably worth wetting this down. So I can let some of the paint blend. the last little bit we'll do, I want to zoom in a little, make sure I have focus. Okay. It's just adding a couple of highlights. So I'm taking an opaque white paint, and just putting it just on the tip of my brush. And this light would be shining down on this. So just painting in a couple of little highlights. I want to get it a little stronger value of white. Even on the tops of these, right, just finding a couple of moments. I can also take and add in some of my people's shoulders and heads. Help to find them a little bit better. And maybe there's, you know, a couple of lights or something in the background. You know, I'm not going to play with that. I think I'll leave it like that. Let this get a little lighter on top. And that's a little strong, so I'm just going to pull some of that out. Good. If I do too much, I'm just going to get it too crazy, so I'm not going to work that anymore. Call that done. All right.